Out in the hallway, come on in. We're starting a panel in here that's awesome, and we're giving away a full set of tots. All right, so this is great stories. So some of these you've heard before. I can guarantee there's new stuff that people, long timers, have not seen in this. So we'll jump right in. So this was started way back in the early 90s. There was a guy in Cincinnati who was a dealer and discovered a stash of rocket fets. There were 5 of them in the deal, I think 3 L's and 2 J's or vice versa. And he put this ad out. It was kind of like the biggest find of the time of rocket firing Boba Fetts. But the interesting about it, isn't on here, but because it's too small to read. But he actually put a complete ad in Toy Shop of the entire story of how he found this guy and talked to this guy and everything that went on with the find. So it's kind of an interesting thing to be able to go and read this guy's account. He literally took out an ad to write an account of the story of the find. So that was kind of crazy that he did that. And you can find that on Chris Dragoulias's Toy Shop scrapbook, which you can Google that and find that, and find the issue with this rocket fed article in it, and you'll see the other article too, and you can read it there. So it's a pretty interesting story. But this continues on a little bit further because the pure employee that Don Gibbs bought these from kept one of the Fets for himself at the time. Well, I called him years and years later. I didn't realize it was the same guy. If this was him, or I wouldn't have bothered. He said, "Yeah, I sold a bunch of these years ago, but I have one left." I'm like, "Well, do you want to sell the one?" He's like, "Yeah, I'd probably sell it now." So me and Chris Dragoulias were in Cincinnati one time, and we were going to pick this thing up from the guy's house. And it was like 10 o'clock at night, and I kid you not, the road looked exactly like this. We were in the middle of nowhere, Kentucky, and it was dark, and it was kind of rainy out, and not a house for a mile. We're like, we gotta be lost. Well, eventually we passed the road that was like the road he lived on. We missed his road, and he was just up the road 2 blocks. I had to turn the car around, and as I'm turning the car around and start heading back, I look in my rearview mirror and I see police lights. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. We're in the middle of nowhere. What's a cop even doing here, let alone pulling me over? And so he comes up to the car, he says, I pulled you over because one of your taillights is out. I'm like, oh, okay, I didn't know. He asked for registration license, walks back to the car, and I turned to Chris and I said, we may have a problem here. I was like, I just bought this car. It's in my wife's name, not mine. And oh, by the way, the license plates, we just took them off her old car and put them on here, and they're not registered to this vehicle. Oh. We've got basically an SUV back full of suspicious-looking boxes and several $1,000s in our pocket. I'm like, I'm not sure what's going to happen, but it wouldn't surprise me if this cop searches our car at some point in time. So anyway, the cop came back and he actually said, he understood. He said, "Yeah, get your license plates changed over." And he saw that at least my name was the same name that's on the registration. It's my wife's, not me. So he let us go, fortunately, with the warning. And so then we drove up to this guy's house about 20 minutes later, too late, and I bought the Finder J-Slide Rocket Fet off of the same guy that Don Gibbs find. Shane, you want to come up?
Okay.
Shane's here. We're going to tell this one.
Can you hear me? Is that good? I got contacted a few years ago by a former Glasslight employee. He was really kind of sketchy on the details of what it was that he had his actual role with the company, and I kind of gathered that there may have been some things just borrowed, at the time of the company shutting down or people being fired or whatever. But he had contacted me, and he said he had a whole bunch of stuff to get rid of that was from Glasslight. For those of you who don't know, Glasslight was the Brazilian licensee that released Power Force and Droids toys, and they're famous for producing flicks. So he had messaged me, and he had just sent me like the list of all this stuff that he had, but from was I don't speak Portuguese. He didn't speak English. And so we're trying to like negotiate this deal. I had to have a very, very good friend in Brazil who speaks fluent English and negotiate the deal as a middleman. Then we had to use an escrower, a guy to do escrow because he didn't quite trust me and I didn't quite trust him that the money was going to get there. So it was this really convoluted deal. But anyways, in the end, it all worked out. And we got this huge collection of glassite stuff, including 2 sealed side gunners and 2 never removed from box ATL interceptors. There was a lot of prototype material, they called these photobitos. They were basically the CYMK, the color separations for the card backs. There were several sets of the transparency card back separations for both the droids and the Power of the Force. It's good, cool. And there are a bunch of catalogs too.
All right, so everybody here mostly probably knows that there was a Jawa with a vinyl cape. We changed it to cloth, and the vinyl one is the hard to get, most desirable one. But there's an interesting story here. There's this guy back in the mid-90s named Al Rosen, who was originally a baseball card collector and went out finding collections of baseball cards from original owners, like he bought them as a kid or whatever. So he decided that he'd kind of tap that market and he was going to move over into Star Wars stuff and like try to corner the market on some of the science stuff. And he just put out the craziest ads in the toy shop. Every ad he did was like this, just wacky kind of like, you know, he called himself Mr. Mint was his name. But he did turn up, him and Josh Walensky did turn up one really interesting find, which the story was that there was this movie theater that had ordered some product from Kenner in order to give away a toy at the movie theater for each person buying a ticket for one of the movies for Star Wars. Well, it turns out this guy had a box of leftover that he had just kept. But the crazy thing was that the box was 100% full of vinyl cape Jawas. So brand new, right out of the box. I don't know how many exactly were in this find. I think it was more than a dozen. But so it was pretty amazing. It's kind of an interesting story to hear that, you know, these were shipped like complete cases of these Jawas, and this guy, this movie theater had them for all these years. So it was a pretty great score and a really interesting story.
Well, this is one of the most interesting ones recently, and one of the stories we're going to tell that no one ever heard about before. As many of you may know that in Europe there aren't many prototypes for the toys because Kenner made them themselves. And there's only like quality control stuff and so on. But a guy in the UK did some research a couple of years ago and was trying to find stuff from former Peloton employees. The factory in Colville was shut down, and but he did some digging, and all of a sudden he found out that a museum bought a lot of stuff from Peloton when they shut down, and started to hear like rumors about, wow, they bought so much cool stuff from Peloton when they shut down, and it was a large museum owned by the government, so it's like Queen's owned, and loads of Action Force prototypes were in the find, and a wood pattern and the hardware parts for a 12-inch R2. And this is like in a basement in a museum owned by the Queen. So likely it will never hit the market. And there are other neat stuff. I think you saw pictures of the Action Force ones. Yeah, really cool.
The cool thing with the Action Force thing is there was a figure that had been in a guy in the U.S. had, and no one had ever knew where it came from. And it was a totally different paint deco and no one could identify it. And he had a $1,000 bounty out if anyone could ever solve the mystery. And the mystery was solved with this find as well, but he never paid up the $1,000 bounty to the guy who found it.
That's a good add to this one.
Yeah, so there's stuff out there even in Europe, and that's pretty cool. And like so significant ones like this wood pattern, it blows my mind.
Yeah, wood patterns are extremely rare, so there's not many that exist anywhere. So to find one in Europe and around, it's like just a crazy story. Okay, a lot of people know this one. So there was this guy that just randomly showed up on one of the forums whose name was Dog Tuna and started posting that he had some things for sale and eventually posted these pictures. Like crazy amounts of super rare Power of the Force items. And he was selling them for pretty cheap at first, but then eventually caught on and raised his prices. And these were all stored in an attic for years and years and years, so they were out of the sunlight. And a lot of times these bubbles would yellow, and these were almost all clear. So, and just as a funny aside, my dog only eats tuna now. So I don't know how that ties in, but dog tuna fine. So he's kind of old, and he stopped eating his dog food, so he started feeding him tuna.
Just don't feed him carton food.
Well, this is quite interesting as well. I told there wasn't much European pre-production stuff, but this a few things have turned up last years. And this is one of the more crazy stories. A guy turned up on the forums and basically wanted tip how to remove stickers because he thought they were really ugly. And they were like General Mills factory samples. And he thought they were like bad. But thankfully, he didn't remove them. Like there's a trial with Java with the sample sticker. And he got like, I think there was like 40 of these samples in his file, and now it's dropped off the earth again. He still has it. He think it belongs in the set. First he wanted to destroy it, and now he thinks it belongs to the set.
It would diecast vehicles too.
Yeah, diecast vehicle. I know. Oh no. Well, so tons of stuff. Not all. These are the cool ones with the stickers on the front. Some had on the back. And that was just bought from a former Peloton employee.
So back in around, it must have been 98 or so, I get a random email off my website, this lady saying, hey, my ex-husband used to work at Kenner and I've got this stuff. And I'm like, so I call her, talk to her, like, what is it? She's like, well, there's these, they're about 9 or 10 inches around, and they're kind of flexible, and like they have coin images on them. I'm like, what's that? I'm like, nobody had ever heard of anything like that. All the coin stuff that anybody knew about was like hard sculpts and really rigid resin pieces. Like, you sure? Like, she's like, yeah, I can like end them in too. And so I still didn't know what they were. I'm like, well, this was before digital photography and everything, and so literally she faxed me a copy of one of them, put it on the fax machine and faxed it through, and it was like cut off on the side. I had this black and white thing of the Emperor's Royal Guard, and it was like this. I'm like, well, I don't know what that is, but it's pretty cool. So I was like, let's plan to come down and take a look at it in person. And she said she had some other stuff too. So I called up John Wooten because she was in Columbus and John Wooten was in Columbus, and drove down to Columbus. And, turned up this find of what we call in the collectors community soft copies, which in the coin industry they're called rubbers. But it was the first one, and nobody had ever seen anything like this before. So it's always kind of a neat story when something new turns up. It's so radically different from anything you've ever seen. It's kind of surprising. But speaking of surprising, so here's a picture of me and John John's holding that stack of soft copies. 63rd coin in his hand, and I'm holding the Power of the Force coin album, the only one ever found with the actual logo on it.
It looks like the wedding singer, Chris.
Adam Sandler.
So that was a pretty interesting one, and then to at the time this was like the first real stuff I'd ever discovered, so I didn't know what to do with it. So I literally got a bunch of group of friends in an email chain and did like this little silent auction where nobody knew who it was. And I thought I was being clever, and I was like, I'm going to sign people names so that nobody knows who's bidding, because I don't want friends to bid against each other, and so I signed everybody names. But what I didn't know is, of course, behind my back, they were all telling each other what their names were, so they all knew who was bidding on what. So these all went for auction, and I think the most expensive one went for like $150 at the time. So auctioned them all. Some of them went for as cheap as $75. So
Do you still have them? You should put the grid in. I know you had it at one point. There was the grid with all the bidding on it.
oh yeah, I should have put that in there. Yeah, I do have. I should have put that sheet in here. I still have the spreadsheet the text with the name of the soft copies and all the amounts they went for. So I should have put that in here. That would have been an interesting thing. But they were between like $75 and $150. I think was what they went for.
Well, Playmix was the license, had a license for Star Wars toys in Sweden, and this store isn't as fascinating as the one with CJ Tools, but it shows how cool it is to track down employees and what they have. And I've been doing some research for years, and finally paid off. And I tracked down the one that made the stuff that was in the marketing department and saved a lot of stuff. This was part of the find. There were loads of stuff from other toy lines as well, but these are store displays. The shelf topper wasn't known to exist before this find, and lots of Playmix stickers that will be for sale at the room sales later on later this evening. And he's keep digging out stuff from his basement, so it's not compared to these guys' stories, but I can just imagine how cool it was back in the day, going down to Cincinnati. But this is what you can't find even in Sweden. So these stores displays are like 1, 2 of kinds. They're extremely rare. Sweden is such a small market. Most of it got thrown away. Some catalogs in there as well. Cool things about the catalogs, they're like reference X with the numbers, how many they printed on the back, and to me that's pretty cool. There's some neat from other toy lines, My Little Pony signs.
Is it My Little Pony like suddenly big again?
It's thanks to Shane, that's My Little Pony, yeah.
Shut up.
There was some cool Action Force stuff, and Transformer stuff, and He-Man stuff, so lots of cool stuff.
Okay. This was an interesting one. So there's a figure that was only made in Brazil in very small quantities, and that was the only place it was made. And it's called Blix. It's probably the most expensive production loose figure made. But there was just in a random category, in a random group of stuff that you see on the left there with, Barney Rubble and a duck and some other things. Little Fozzie the bear. There in the background, you see Blix. And it's pretty astounding that anybody that actually knew who Blix was actually found this auction with the hundreds of thousands of auctions on eBay and little lots of these junk toys. It's unbelievable that a guy who knew what it was actually saw this auction and bought the Blix for $1. And it's like, how much do they go for now? $1,500.
I just sold one for $3,500.
Yeah, Shane just sold one for $3,500. So back when this was a little bit a few years ago, 1999. So they weren't going for quite that much back then. But yeah, to go on eBay at the time, a $1,500 or $2,000 figure for $1, that's a pretty good steal. So. And the funny thing about this story is, like, once it came out and other people found it, everybody was emailing this person who auctioned it saying, you don't realize what you just sold for $1, but, the seller, give him or her credit. She went through, or he went through with the deal and, sold it for $1, even though they knew that it was worth quite a bit more. They just lived up to their agreement on the eBay sale, so that was pretty good of them.
Did they ever tell how they found it?
I think it was just a random search and just.
No, I mean the person who had it. They had this.
Oh, I don't know that we ever.
Yeah, I never heard from the seller what happened.
Joe, you got to tell this one.
Sit down.
This is the most ridiculous collectible ever.
Of course, it has to be my collection.
Has to be
This is
Joe.
Joe's collection.
Okay. These are the molds that were used to make the Turkish Kuzey figures, which is pretty much the Cadillac of the bootleg world as far as they're incredibly heavy, they're incredibly hard to display.
They're big.
They're big.
You can see a carded figure kind of in the left upper there. It shows how big these are. Like 12 inches square, 24 inches square. How much do they weigh?
Anywhere from 35 to 55 pounds each. except for the weapon molds. Those are smaller. Those are made like 10
He's hitting on me.
But the story with these is a former employee at SB Products in Istanbul